So now let's look, there's something that I've always wanted to do, and I've actually kept an eye on this. Because the question is, you can measure how many viruses there are, but if you're not measuring all the tests, like now we have at-home tests, are our numbers for the tests really accurate? We have a person who caught COVID, was at the hospital and died, but they were 90 years old and they were there for another problem. You know, did the COVID actually kill them or not? And there, you remember all the fights we had about this. All along, I was saying, when the dust settles on this, I'm going to look at excess deaths. Because you can't, it's much harder to hide a body. You know, people are accusing different countries of hiding stuff and things like that. But it's much harder to hide a death certificate. You know, those have to be accounted for by the state. And those are accounted for in many ways. So, but also it captures all the side effects. Like if you have a very severe lockdown, then you end up not getting enough food and you end up starving. Well, that's an excess death as well. But to me, that's actually what I want to see, because I want to know how much above average are all of our deaths. If we are causing, rather than helping deaths, it would show up in an excess death analysis. And all it is taking the normal baseline, how many more deaths than you take like the average of deaths for the last 10 years, you figure out some way to account for the fact that there's fluctuations from year to year. But pretty much these are, it's actually pretty straightforward to do in the U.S. Other countries, it's a little more tricky, but this is also why I wanted to see this analysis. There's been 3 analyses of excess deaths. I'm going to focus on one of them because this one actually has uncertainties that came along with it. So this gives you the right flavor of the uncertainty. And I want to draw conclusions based on the overall uncertainty that will fit with both the lower and upper bound. So don't look at this too closely. But the thing is, let's say for the whole world, there have been almost 6 million confirmed COVID-19 deaths. But how many have there actually been? How many deaths have there been above average? And I want to remind you once again, not necessarily COVID deaths that we didn't catch, but deaths by any extra reason. And about 20 million. So that shows that this is more severe than just the numbers would indicate. And of course, it makes sense that it would be higher, just because, you know, I don't trust numbers from a lot of countries. I don't think that people, and there are, you know, there's people that die outside the system and things like that. But overall, deaths are usually counted, if there's anything that should be counted accurately, it's pure number of deaths. And so it's millions, and it's factors. It's not just 50% higher, it's factor of 2 or 3 is our question, higher than the confirmed COVID deaths. Let's look at the U.S. Now, in the U.S., we have a hospital system and information systems that do catch most things. And for all of the bickering about is this state undercounting, is that state overcounting, that's an order of magnitude. That's like questions of 10% when we're talking about questions of 200, 300%. So as long as we're looking at this level, the U.S. excess deaths are, you know, you've probably heard that we have crossed 1 million confirmed COVID-19 deaths. The excess deaths are 1.2 million, roughly. So it's about, it's about a bit higher. And the other thing you can look at, these are cumulative deaths over time. And you can see when the slope was steeper, you can see that actually early on, because we grew everything we could into avoiding the virus, we did actually keep deaths down. But then, as vaccination came out, and as people reached their limit with what they could do, and as damage, we've got to admit as public health officials that the lockdown did some unintended damage. All of that comes through, and it resulted in the deaths going up quite a bit. But the official death count and the excess death count do correlate more or less for the U.S. But what about India? Because this is the big thing. But they were so overloaded. I know that they went, oh yeah, Chris.
Oh, the excess deaths?
Yeah.
Not like counting the COVID deaths, so COVID death counts as an excess death?
The excess deaths actually don't care about COVID. They're just a death from any cause.
So all those 990.
They'll put the baseline. Yeah, well, so you have confirmed COVID deaths, and then the excess deaths, the COVID deaths is on top of excess deaths. It's possible, that there were some deaths that were, there is a possibility of having negative excess deaths, because you can actually be lower, and there are some countries actually that got that for some periods of time. No one got that for all the periods of time, I can tell you that. Yeah, so this whole data set is there, and I do like the economists of the three. There's one from WHO, and there's a third one that came out. The thing that the third one has an advantage of is it actually breaks down, number one, by state, and number two, by province in India. So you can actually see the different provinces' excess deaths. I should also say that India's government is vociferously objecting to these studies because the government does not look good. You have the confirmed deaths way down here, and you have 10-fold higher excess death estimate. And that seems to be, and you see that the excess death estimate, you actually have a lower bound of excess deaths that's negative at first. This is the time when we were interviewing and talking about things. And it really did look like COVID was low, and then you can see Delta hitting right here. You can also see Delta hitting right there. So this is objective. There's big upper bounds, lower bounds. But I do want to say, well, let's take this average and see what it looks like. Oh, and by the way, I want to point your attention, I just did a quick calculation. How many excess deaths as a percentage of population occurred during this time period? 0.43% of the population died in excess in India. 0.36% of the population died in excess of the USA. So even though ours were reported more accurately, if this is right, the uncertainty bounds are really nothing where I feel comfortable saying that we had fewer excess deaths in India. I'm more likely to say that they were similar than they were different. And the world is 0.27% of the population died from COVID. And you know that in Western Europe, and in Western Europe and in the U.S., there were, you see the U.S. is above average in terms of excess deaths. And that's all I'm comfortable saying. I'm comfortable saying the USA and the India both have a lot of excess deaths. In the U.S., I'm comfortable saying that COVID was better captured and better reported. That's another thing you can say when you look at that. You can plot this out by time, and you can see just how big the peak is for India and for the Delta peak. You see there also was another peak that was around, that would be around Omicron time. That's probably an Omicron peak that resulted in a significant amount of excess deaths as well, although the COVID deaths right here are still pretty small. Big error bars, but you can see that the Delta wave was extraordinarily bad for India. If you look at the U.S., actually the excess deaths does not have a distinct disconnect from the confirmed deaths at any point I can see. Maybe there's a bit more here, it does look like there's a bit more of a disconnect on this side of the graph, but I'm not comfortable with even saying that. In other words, our official COVID count appears to at least mirror the overall excess death seasonality and count. There's nothing huge, and you can look at different states as well, and you can't find a state that is clearly hiding deaths. They wouldn't be able to, and it would show up as the excess deaths. So here's the final thing. I want to go through some maps, and here's the world map of COVID. And these lead to two hypotheses that I actually want to look through. If you look at this is excess deaths. Oh, and by the way, what stands out as the worst country for excess deaths? Yeah, and obviously, it's like the worst time possible. It's never a good time to start a war. But why would you do that when you were just your elderly population was devastated by this? And possibly there could be a connection. I don't know if you have thought.
Well, one of the reasons that people that conversate about this sort of thing and why they would invade is that their military is extremely young and their population is extremely old.
Right.
So like they're literally just about to run out of an army at all.
Right.
So they have to invade. It's like like the leaders feel that they might have to invade because
That's
they won't
plausible.
army.
Terrible, right? It's horrible reasoning, but that fits with this data.
And they have terrible birth rates.
Yeah. So the thing is, long term for Russia, just as a country, does not look good from all this. And but also notice how Eastern Europe has been hit really hard, and in fact, Ukraine has high excess deaths. So I was looking at this, and I also added in Hong Kong. I put Hong Kong in the wrong place. I think it should. Oh, I moved this down. But now I know it looks like I don't know my geography because I pointed to the wrong place. I know it's not there, but Hong Kong was an excess death. This is after Omicron hit them. And remember, Omicron hit them hard. They did not have enough vaccine uptake in the elderly population. They also did have a vaccine that you can talk to different people. I'm convinced it was not as good. But even after that, I wanted to see where did they end up. They ended up 0.13%, which would be 130 on this scale. They ended up being still lighter than dark. And I just noticed that because, I don't trust the numbers coming out of China any more than I trust the numbers coming out of Russia for the official COVID counts and for the definitions of if you died with COVID and things like that. But I do trust excess deaths numbers, and I also trust Japan's numbers, and I trust South Korea's numbers. I did my first analysis when we didn't know what the heck was going on back in March 2020. I based my analysis on South Korea's numbers, and you see that their excess deaths have been kept low. Now, Australia, they are basically able to control import and export, but it's not, and these countries have also tried to control, but have they really controlled it that much more than other countries have controlled it? And I just think it's interesting that these very different countries are all very light colored, even down into Southeast Asia here. It's only when you get close to India that you start to get the darker colors again. And again, US and India, same color, essentially. That backs up what I'm saying. Of course, because of my interest in Burundi, you see they're not the lightest, but sub-Saharan Africa is also this belt of lighter colors. So I want to think about these two observations, that these are the biggest areas of lighter colors that can't be explained by geographical isolation. And I did want to, so my philosophy is, maybe this hypothesis is that they have general cross-reactivity. I know I had to get a yellow fever injection, and I never know that I've gotten COVID. I feel like I've been protected from it. And one of the things that I've always wondered is, I have a diverse amount of vaccines in me, which explains, I don't know, what do you think that explains? But I would hope that it would give me some of this cross-reactivity. And as far as I know, now of course, given my track record on India, I'm probably going to catch COVID tomorrow. But all that's to say, I think cross-reactivity is real. I thought it would help India. It turns out I think it helped it with the first wave, but it didn't help. It also got around it. I think that it still helps sub-Saharan Africa, and I think it's helping Asia. If you really look in here, you can see there's a lot of light colors in a lot of very different countries. And you also know that there's back coronaviruses with occasional zoonotic spillovers and things like that. And I think if that's going on in the background, if we have a certain protection of common cold, but it's probably not enough to make a huge difference. What if they have like common cold circulating and also these cryptic back coronaviruses that sort of flare up, but they never really catch on and then they go away. But your T cells remember. I would love to be able to actually look at T cells, look at peptide repertoires, and think about if this is a genuine possibility. But you look at this thing, and the Philippines is different, but there's always a fly in the ointment, right? But there's a lot of light color in Asia, and especially Eastern Asia. So that's my idea. So Omicron was a really weird event. Surprised even Trevor Bedford. And he's basically saying, we had one Omicron event in about 2.5 years. Does that mean every 2.5 years we'll have an Omicron event? Or maybe we have one every 10 years, and we just got unlucky or lucky, as the case may be. So Bedford says that he sort of splits the difference between 2 years and 10 years, and he says every 4 to 5 years. And the logic is the same as that of an earthquake. You know that you can be overdue for an earthquake. It doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. There's a statistical improbability or probability for the whole thing. The leap to Omicron, the leap to Delta was a bad surprise and a bad event. The leap to Omicron was a good event on the whole. Just looking at these 3 leaps, and one of them didn't make much difference, one of them was bad, one of them was good. Very small sample size. But my guess is severity is disconnected from transmissibility. And at least that means that you can have something like Omicron happening, where transmissibility increases but severity decreases. And hopefully this is going to be, I'm more and more convinced that Omicron genuinely was a good thing. Because, I mean, we're enduring waves of it right now, and it is not good, and there is long COVID. Long COVID is real. But I also think long COVID is connected to severity of infection and less severe infections. Again, maybe I'm too optimistic, but this is my reasoning. The immune system is supposed to protect us, and so I think it's doing a pretty good job, all things considered, right? All right, so that is my talk for today. Thanks for listening.